Yeah. Oh, my alarm. You see, that happens every TMF week. My alarm at 9 a.m. going off for this session. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are tuning in from. First things first, can you hear me clearly? I know people are filing in right now, so let me know in the chat if you can hear me and where you're tuning in from before I get started into the housekeeping for another year of TMF week.
Hi, Danny. We hear you.
Thank you, Maisha. Hello from North Carolina. Hello from Houston. Hi, everybody. Hello from the UK. Oh my God, amazing. Everyone's piling in. Welcome, guys, to TMF Week 2025. Woo! It is the most exciting week in TMF here with us at Montreal. We are so excited to be presenting to you guys today. Today's session, today's programming is very exciting. It's TMF 101 all day, so I am very excited. But let me just get through some housekeeping really quick. So first things first, guys, all the sessions are going to be recorded and will be available online at the end of the event. All the attendees are going to get a certificate for the entire TMF Week conference, not for each session. So please wait until the end of the conference to ask us where those are. We will be sending those out at the end. We're going to have 15 minutes of QA at the end of the session. So we're planning on a 30-minute presentation today with 15 minutes of QA at the end. Then I'm going to introduce the next session, and then we're going to get into the networking breakout rooms for 15 minutes in between sessions, everybody. And so, today we have an exciting session. We have TMF 101, the crash course in trial master file fundamentals with Maisha Rahim here at Montreal. I could give her a long-winded, wonderful intro, but I know that she is going to do herself the best justice ever. So Maisha, I will give you the floor, and I'm very excited to watch this presentation.
Thank you so much, Danny. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can.
All right, perfect. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for TMF Week. As Danny mentioned, I'm Maisha Rahim. I'm the head of customer success here at Montreal. And we're so excited to be embarking on this week-long journey exploring all things TMF. As Danny mentioned, we thought for the first day we would start at the very beginning with TMF 101. So today's first session is a crash course in the fundamentals of trial master file, or TMF. And before we dive right into that, I realize that some of you may be coming here with beginner level knowledge of TMF. Others may be here as experts. So please feel free to share your TMF experience in the chat, whether you've worked directly in a TMF before, whether you've gone through inspections, etc., because it's always very exciting to see where our audience is in terms of their level of comfort with the TMF. As for myself, I am a customer success head here at Montreal. As Danny mentioned, I started my career at Montreal as a product specialist back in 2018, where I worked in the customer experience team to help clinical QA and regulatory teams at our partner organizations implement Montreal's eTMF Connect, Quality Connect, and RegDocs Connect systems. Today, I'm working with the CX team at Montreal to provide onboarding, migration, and post-go live support. In terms of the agenda for today's session, we'll start at the very beginning, going through what is a TMF. We'll talk about ICH-GCP and how the TMF fits into that, and touch on the TMF Index, the who, what, where, and when of filing in your TMF. And then we'll move on to the fundamentals of TMF management, focusing particularly on some common challenges and pitfalls, the TMF plan, and how to have an inspection-ready TMF by measuring and tracking your metrics. So let's dive right in with what is a TMF. Your TMF is a collection of essential records collected during your clinical trial that individually and collectively allow the conduct of the clinical trial to be reconstructed, and it allows auditors and inspectors to evaluate that trial. Your TMF serves as a source of truth for your clinical trial, containing all records related to the planning, the conduct, and the closeout of your trial. And it is a critical piece for regulatory inspections and audits. So in case anyone is coming into this week wondering if you really need a TMF at all for your clinical trial, the short answer is yes, you absolutely do, because your TMF is going to tell the story of your clinical trial by documenting all of the trial activities and decisions in terms of what happened at the startup phase, when the trial was conducted, and when it was closed. So it really is the foundation of your study, as it establishes the credibility of the trial results, and it literally is holding all of the information relating to the key decisions and important essential records. In terms of the regulatory aspect as well, it verifies compliance with GCP and regulations, as we'll talk about further in today's session. So the TMF is, in fact, a critical output of your clinical trial for both internal and external stakeholders. From the regulatory compliance perspective, your regulatory authorities like the FDA, the EMA, Health Canada, all require your sponsors to maintain a complete and up-to-date TMF, as it ensures that the trial was conducted in accordance to applicable regulations and GCP. In terms of evidence of trial conduct, the TMF documents what happened, when, and by whom throughout the study. So it demonstrates that your protocols were followed and your study plans, such as your monitoring plan, your oversight plan, risk plan, etc., were followed, and your data collection was accurate. In terms of audit and inspection readiness, regulatory inspections often focus heavily on your TMF, because a complete TMF allows inspectors to verify that your trial was ethically and scientifically sound. And last but not least, in terms of oversight and collaboration, your TMF supports real-time visibility into trial progress for all stakeholders, such as your sponsor, your CRO, your auditors, etc., enabling efficient collaboration, task sharing, and timely issue resolution across teams. So we mentioned a couple of times that your TMF allows you to demonstrate that you are following ICH-GCP. So let's talk a little bit more about that and dive a little bit deeper. So ICH-GCP is an international ethical and scientific quality standard for the design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysis, and reporting of your clinical trial. If you follow GCP, it means that your data and reported results are credible and accurate, and the rights, safety, well-being, integrity, and confidentiality of your trial subjects are protected. ICH-GCP is a unified standard for the European Union, Japan, and the US to facilitate mutual acceptance of clinical data by the regulatory authorities. And when it comes to your TMF, ICH-GCP provides a lot of guidance with regards to the essential records. So if you go to Appendix C of ICH-GCP E6 R3, you will find that it says the essential records permit and contribute to the evaluation of the conduct of a trial in relation to the compliance of the investigator and sponsor with GCP and applicable regulatory requirements and the reliability of the results produced. The essential records are used as part of the investigator oversight and sponsor oversight, including monitoring of the trial. These records are used by the sponsor's independent audit function and during inspections by regulatory authorities to assess the trial conduct and the reliability of the trial results. So you can see this really reinforces that essential records must be maintained in a way that allows for the reconstruction of the trial and conduct, the trial conduct and the data quality. As the container of those essential records, the TMF is therefore a foundational tool for demonstrating adherence to GCP principles. We talk a lot about essential records in ICH-GCP E6 R3. And in Appendix C, we have a lot of guidance provided to us regarding the essential records. So in terms of the details of that, to summarize, Appendix C provides us with guidance on what makes a record essential, clarity on the content and maintenance of essential records. It provides guidance about access to relevant essential records for the different stakeholders. And then it also provides a table of examples of essential records. You can see a screenshot of that on the screen here, but it is important to note that this table is not an exhaustive list, and other trial records may also be considered essential by the sponsor or the investigator based on your study design and conduct, and your study-specific list of records that are expected and required for your TMF should be defined in what we call your TMF Index. Okay, so diving a little bit deeper into the TMF Index, your TMF Index is a structured listing that outlines all of the records that are required and expected to be maintained in your study-specific TMF. Okay, so it serves as a roadmap or table of contents for the TMF, because when you are managing hundreds and thousands of clinical documentation, you need to have a map to be able to find a specific document when you need it, and the TMF Index should allow you to do so. Okay, it is specific to each study, and it tells you what to file in your TMF, where to file your records, when to file them, and who is involved in terms of producing those records and filing those records in your TMF. Okay, so let's explore each of those aspects in a little bit more detail, starting with what to file in the TMF. We already talked about the list of essential records that are provided in Appendix C of ICH-GCP E6R3, but we said that that's not a comprehensive list or an exhaustive list. And so lucky for us, we also have another extremely important resource available to us in the form of the TMF Reference Model, which defines core TMF artifacts and other artifacts that may be expected during the trial, which you can then, take that list and customize for your trial based on your company SOPs. So the TMF Reference Model is essentially a widely adopted industry standard for structuring and managing your TMF documents, and it provides standardized taxonomy and metadata and outlines a reference definition of TMF content using standard nomenclature. I don't know if you can see clearly from the screenshot that we have here, but essentially the reference model categorizes your TMF content into process zones that are further subcategorized into sections. And then within that, you have each of your artifacts or records. And because this is a widely adopted industry standard, by following this structure, it's very easy for anyone going into your TMF to understand where they can find a record that they are looking for. Okay, so this list expands on the ICH-GCP Essential Records list, and we provided the URL here for you to be able to access the reference model for yourself if you'd like to take a look at it in more detail. And what's really interesting is that because there is a new version of the reference model being worked on, version 4, if you go into this URL, you can actually provide feedback if you'd like to with regards to your use of the reference model so far, and if there's anything you'd like to have taken into consideration for version 4. So in terms of adopting the TMF reference model at your organization, that comes with many different benefits, including standardizing the filing and nomenclature of your TMF content, which thereby leads to improved efficiency and of your work processes. It also facilitates the exchange of information between stakeholders, because if you think about, for example, at the end of a trial, when, let's say, a CRO is returning a study to a sponsor, having the TMF structured based on the reference model will mean that, as the sponsor, as you're receiving your study, you're already familiar with the way the study has been structured. You're already familiar with how to navigate through that study TMF, etc. And then last but not least, the reference model is customizable to meet your company and study-specific TMF requirements, which is critical to do because you want to make sure that what you have in your TMF reflects, your study design and your study conduct. So it is important to customize the TMF reference model based on your study design, and that would go into your study index, as we mentioned. So now that we know what to file in our TMF, let's talk about where to file that content. Now, traditionally, we would see most organizations managing paper TMS that would be in physical binders and folders that are stored in offices or secure archives. Nowadays, most modern companies have moved to an electronic trial master file or an eTMF, be that a cloud-based system or a server-based system. And the advantages of using an eTMF are plentiful, and we won't really go into the details of that here today. But I do want to mention that when you are managing your TMF in an electronic system, that typically comes with metadata or properties that are assigned to your records that help with search and retrieval of your TMF records. So that includes metadata such as site number, version, document dates, etc. And then there's also an audit trail that tracks changes to your documents and user access. And these are not just nice to have for your eTMF. These are actually part of the regulatory requirements for maintaining your TMF content in an eTMF. In some cases, you may also have a situation where some records may live in a different system or location. So for example, you might have a scenario where you have some CVs that live in an HR system, for example, or some contracts or agreements that live in a legal system. In that case, I mean, that's okay, but it is absolutely critical that the location of the authoritative source is documented in your TMF index, so that, if you're going into your TMF and you're looking for those documents, you don't have a false misconception of your TMF being incomplete because you don't see those files there. You should be able to go into your TMF index and know, okay, these files live in this system. Next up, let's talk about when to file your TMF content. So do you wait until the end of your study? Do you wait until you know that there may be an inspection coming up? Well, the answer to that is that you must be filing your TMF content in a contemporaneous manner, which means filing records to your TMF should happen in real time or as close as possible to when the document is finalized. Two key considerations for doing so include tracking your key trial milestones and events. So throughout the trial, as you hit different milestones such as study startup, site initiation, site closeout, you should be filing the records that are produced with those milestones. And then in terms of different events that might occur, so things like protocol amendment, for example, or if there's a change of principal investigator at a site, these events should trigger the filing of content within your TMF as relevant. The second aspect is ensuring that you're meeting predetermined filing timelines. So typically at the start of your study, you would be defining acceptable filing timelines for your TMF content within what we call the TMF Plan, which is something that we will be talking about in a lot more detail in a little bit. But it is important in terms of filing your TMF records to ensure that you're meeting your timeliness goals as defined in your TMF plan. It's also important to note that contemporaneous filing is not just an expectation, but actually a regulatory requirement and required by ICH-GCP practices as well. And then next, let's talk about who is responsible for filing into the TMF. Okay, if we think about the sponsor organization, inside the sponsor organization, there will be different units, departments, functions that may be document owners for content that's going into your TMF. And maybe these are teams that are not necessarily going to be using the eTMF or the TMF actively. Maybe they will not need regular access to the system either, but it is important to note that they are going to be producing documentation that has to be filed in the TMF. So they will have an impact on the inspection readiness of your TMF. As a result, it is important that everyone who is involved in producing that documentation or generating TMF content has visibility and awareness of your TMF. Okay. One useful tool that you can use to establish what needs to be done and who is expected to do it with regards to your TMF is RACI charts. So RACI charts are essentially used to track different tasks and set expectations of who will complete these tasks, where you assign a letter for each of the tasks, where R stands for responsible, A for accountable, C for who is to be consulted for that specific task, and I for who is to be informed. So here you have an example of a RACI chart where you can set sort of the expectations for the different activities surrounding your TMF. We talked about, the different responsibilities within your sponsor organizations, but the truth is your essential records are going to be coming from a variety of different sources, not just your sponsor organization. As you already know, there are a variety of different people who will contribute to your clinical trial. So of course, there will be many people contributing to your TMF as a result. There will be documents that are generated by the sponsor, of course, but you may also have a CRO creating and managing documents. Investigators will have documents that need to be collected. You might have other vendors such as testing, statistics, maybe data management. And of course, all of your ethics committee and review board documents and approvals should go into your TMF as well as other stakeholders that may be involved. One thing to note, however, is that even though you might have different individuals and different organizations that are producing content that will go into your TMF, at the end of the day, it is your sponsor who is responsible for the TMF, even if part or all of the responsibilities for TMF management are outsourced. Okay, so in fact, it is a regulatory requirement that the sponsor performs adequate TMF oversight to ensure that all of your essential records are filed in a timely manner and are filed correctly. They should provide oversight to ensure records demonstrate compliance and readiness for inspection at all times, and any delegated responsibilities are tracked and auditable. Okay. In terms of ICH-GCP, we see that a sponsor may transfer any or all of the sponsor's trial-related activities to a service provider in accordance with applicable regulatory requirements. However, the ultimate responsibility for the sponsor's trial-related activities, including protection of participants' rights, safety, and well-being and reliability of the trial data, resides with the sponsor. So it is important for the sponsor to have regular TMF access and to continuously evaluate the inspection readiness of your TMF. With that, we will move on to the fundamentals of TMF management, starting with some common pitfalls to avoid with TMF management. So when it comes to managing your TMF, some challenges that you may face include delayed filing that leads to gaps in documentation, missing or incomplete documents that can be the result of poor communication, for example. You might have lack of stakeholder awareness of responsibilities, and you might have weak version control or inconsistent file naming of content in your TMF. All of the first 4 points here are really indicative of one big issue, which is that you don't really have a clear TMF plan or SOPs for TMF management in place that would address, each of the points that we've talked about here. So in terms of that TMF plan, if we think about what that is, your TMF plan is essentially the operating manual for how your TMF management is executed during the study. Okay, so the TMF plan will document the processes and management strategy to ensure an inspection-ready TMF at all times. And the purpose of the plan is really to clearly define and establish what is expected from all of the relevant parties to ensure the delivery of a high-quality TMF. We said at the beginning that your TMF tells the story of your clinical trial, And in order to be able to tell a good story, you need to establish from the beginning what is expected in that story. And so the TMF plan must be in place from the very beginning to set those expectations for all relevant parties. It should cover everything from the process standpoint to the technology standpoint. And over here, we have a few different points mentioned that are typically covered within your TMF plan, including how and who gives access to your TMF, your quality check processes, who is responsible for what in the case of an audit or an inspection, etc. But what I really want to focus on with regards to the TMF plan is the establishment of your metrics, because these metrics will need to be monitored in terms of ensuring that you are where you need to be with your trial master file. So the first step in setting those metrics for your TMF in your plan would involve defining and agreeing on acceptable and measurable metrics. So what are the metrics that you will be measuring, and ensuring that everybody who is involved in ensuring those metrics are acceptable are in alignment with what you have defined. You should then go ahead and establish a framework for reporting on those metrics. So, how are you going to be using those metrics on your end to ensure inspection readiness? And this could include, frequency of tracking the metrics, what are the methods you will use, what are your thresholds, etc. And finally, you should agree upon a mechanism to address any deficiencies should those agreed thresholds not be met. Okay, so you set a standard for your TMF to say, we want to file documents within 15 days, but you're tracking your metrics for timeliness and seeing that that's not being met. What do you do now? It should be clearly established in your TMF plan so that you're not in a position during the trial where you're like, okay, this metric is not being met, but what do we do? Okay, so in terms of what the metrics that you might want to be tracking in your TMF are, we often talk about the 3 pillars for an inspection-ready TMF, and those are completeness, timeliness, and quality. So in terms of each of these 3 pillars, let's go ahead and take a look at each of them individually, starting with completeness. So completeness measures the percentage of artifacts that are present and final in your TMF, as opposed to artifacts that are either expected, missing, or not yet final within your TMF to adequately describe your study events. The goal here is to ensure that all essential records are present, including evidence of the trial conduct and oversight. And some best practices here include establishing and maintaining a study-specific TMF index that you can use to track what's expected and ensure everything that is expected is in your TMF. You can include signposts for records that might be stored elsewhere or that might not be applicable to your specific study based on its design and conduct. And it is recommended also to perform periodic cross-functional TMF reconciliation to ensure everything is in place as needed. The next metric we have here is timeliness, and timeliness essentially measures the percentage of artifacts that were filed within a prescribed or predetermined period of time per your TMF plan, so as to ensure that all of the artifacts are accurate and available for inspections. The goal here is to file your records contemporaneously, meaning as soon as they are finalized, signed, or approved, and no later than filing times predetermined in your TMF plan. And some best practices with maintaining your timeliness goal includes defining clear filing timelines in your TMF. Example, you can say within 5 to 15 business days, we should have our records filed and final. We always say to avoid delaying the upload of records until inspection is expected or study closeout, although unfortunately we still see that a lot happening. But the TMF culture should promote filing contemporaneously. And then monitoring on-time filing KPIs and escalating delays. So if you do notice that you're not meeting your targets, you're not meeting the thresholds in your TMF plan, we should address that right away instead of waiting for that to escalate further. Next, you have the metric that we call quality, which is essentially the percentage of artifacts that have successfully passed verification processes versus the percentage of artifacts that have been rejected. The goal here is to ensure that your records are accurate, complete, legible, and compliant with applicable standards to tell a good final story of the trial. Best practices here include establishing risk-based approach to performing TMF, overall TMF and specific record QC and health checks. You can incorporate QC tools such as Alcoa, Rutola, and good documentation practices principles in your record QC processes. And it is important that you perform deep dives into areas such as your QC outcomes, your rejection reasons, your QC rejection assignees, etc., to identify opportunities for training, process improvement, so on and so forth. Okay, so these are the 3 pillars of your inspection-ready TMF. It is important to reiterate that at the end of the day, it is your sponsor who is expected to perform oversight and ensure that your TMF is inspection ready at all times. And it is important also for the sponsor to demonstrate to an inspector that those oversight activities have been performed throughout the trial. And your inspectors will look at documentation, because at the end of the day, the documentation is the evidence. So as your sponsor performs, or as a sponsor, as you perform your oversight activities, it is important that you document that, because as they say, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. Okay, so I think that's a good note for us to wrap up. We're also hitting time here. I'll just quickly summarize what we talked about, because we did cover a lot during today's session. We tried to keep everything very high level, as today is a fundamentals course. But to summarize everything we talked about, in terms of your TMF introduction, your trial master file is a critical component of your clinical trial that tells the story of the trial and provides evidence that the trial was conducted in accordance with good clinical practice and regulatory requirements. A well-maintained TMF supports patient safety, data integrity, and regulatory success. And knowing who manages it, what it includes, where it's stored, and when to file is essential for GCP compliance, and establishing a good TMF plan and a TMF index at the start of the trial will help you in achieving that. And when it comes to TMF management, ultimately it is the sponsor who is responsible for documented oversight of the TMF to ensure inspection readiness, and that includes monitoring of key inspection readiness metrics, including completeness, timeliness, and quality. So with that, I'll wrap up the presentation part of today's session. Danny, do we want to go into some Q&A?
Yeah, we got a couple questions. Well, first of all, thank you, Maisha. That was a wonderful presentation, and I'm sure there are many people in the audience that found it just as informative as I did. I think it's so cool to kind of get the crash course on TMF. But yeah, so for the QA session, so here we go. Let's go into QA. We've got one question that I actually really liked. Here, let me put this on. Yeah, I'm just gonna pull it up on screen.
I'm not actually seeing the questions on my side.
Yeah, there's a way to pull it up, but I don't know why it's not pulling up right here. Let's see, there we go. So would you consider the TMF index a living document throughout the study, i.e. it's not fully final until the study is complete? That's
a great question, and for sure the short answer to that is yes, it's definitely a living document throughout the study, just because as your study progresses, you might have things that are happening in your study that might have been unexpected. You might have different trial events that occur. And it is important that, as these things happen, you are updating your TMF index to reflect what makes sense for your trial at that point.
For sure. And I know I didn't mention this before, but are there any, if there's any other questions, there's the QA tab right here on the right side where you guys can ask your questions and we'll pull them up. And then also there, if you want the slides from today's session in the doc section there, you can download these slides from Maisha. So here, so let's pull up this one. So we got Lori McConnell. I know a sponsor has to have an ETMF or TMF and a plan. Do the CROs also have to have an ETMF plan too?
So what's really important with regards to having that TMF plan for your study is to ensure that all of the involved stakeholders are in agreement with the TMF plan. So you could have a situation where your CRO has their own plan for how they will be managing the TMF, but what is important is that all relevant stakeholders are in agreement with the overall plan that has been decided for your study.
Perfect.
Okay.
Amazing. Excellent. Pull that off. And then yeah, so oops, sorry, it's just I'm trying to pull on that. Why is sorry, the background was being weird. I'm trying to share my tab and it is not Goldcast is doing something weird to get to the next screen. All right, so here we go. So yeah, so for the next session, guys, what we have coming up, we have the Great Experience or Great Expectations, a tale of two eTMF departments for new TMFers with Jared Brulishin. And yeah, so we got that. Basically, we got 15 minutes before the next session. We're going to have breakout rooms for you guys to kind of mingle in between. So we'll have some of the speakers will be hanging out in there. Your other TMFers are going to be hanging out in there. We're very excited to get TMF Week started this off with a bang. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's session. You know, we're going to go into the networking break now. If there's any questions or would you like to connect with me or Maisha on LinkedIn, please feel free to. You can just find us there under Monitoring's page. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the lounge, and we're excited to get TMF Week started off. Maisha, thanks once again.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
See you in the next session.